Hello my dear students. In this video lesson, we are having a discussion on the poem Refugee Blues written by W H Auden. While speaking about W H Auden, he was a British poet born in 1907 in York. During his college days, he was greatly influenced by the poetry of T.S. Eliot. In 1930, his first collection of poetry, titled Poems, was published, and it inaugurated the movement of English verse known as Auden generation. Auden generation refers to a poetry expressing a desire for political and ethical commitment. And the other members in Auden generation were Stephen Spencer, Louis MacNeice, and Cecil D. Lewis. In 1937, he married Erika Mann. She was the daughter of the German novelist Thomas Mann, and she was there in Germany, and for escaping from Germany she needed a British passport, and to secure that passport to her he married that girl. It was not a marriage out of love. He was a gay and he was not at all interested in girls. He was greatly influenced by Marxist ideals and was involved in the Spanish Civil War in 1937. In 1939, he moved to the US and stayed there with his gay friends till 1956. He won the Pulitzer Prize for the book The Age of Anxiety in 1947 and the National Book Award for The Shield of Achilles in 1955. He died of heart attack in Vienna, Austria in 1973. The important works of W H Auden. Due to the striking features of his poetry, he is called as the poet of the 30s. And his well-known poems include Spain, In Memory of W B H, September 1, 1939, The Unknown Citizen, New Year Letter, and The Shield of Achilles. He was a modern poet who could realistically represent the post-World War world in his poetry. He was always concerned of the marginalized and suppressed people in his writings. Now about the poem Refugee Blues. Refugee Blues was first published in 1939 on the eve of World War II. The poem meditates on the plight of Jewish refugees forced to flee from Nazi Germany, but unable to find refuge elsewhere. As the poem does so, it raises broader questions about isolation, loneliness, and exile. It depicts the trauma of pain of being forced to leave home and of being unable to find a place of safety and security in a violent and uncertain world. The term blues of the title stands for a song that laments an event which is depressing. The meter of the blues was invented by Auden himself, and he used in his poems like the poem Calypso. And this poem was later used by American blacks in their protest poetry. Means the poetry which protests against the apartheid system or the racial discrimination or color discrimination. The repetition of the phrases of the last lines of each of the stanzas and the insertion of my dear in the last line of all stanzas make the poem really very touching, emotional, and powerful. The poem comprises of 12 stanzas of 3 lines each. Now let's move into the text of the poem Refugee Blues. Say this city has 10 million souls, some are living in mansions, some are living in halls. Yet there is no place for us, my dear, yet there is no place for us. In the first stanza, the poet or the speaker tells his lover that the current city they live in has 10 million people. Rich people are living in mansions or bungalows, whereas poor people are living in halls. Halls here refer to shabby houses, slums, or huts. Yet there is no place for the German Jews in that city. They are not given shelter anywhere by anyone. Here the city refers to any city in any places outside Germany. It may refer to a city there in America, or a city there in Britain, or a city in any other nations. Once we had a country and we thought it fair. Look in the atlas and you will find it there. We cannot go there now, my dear, we cannot go there now. The speaker says that once they lived in a country and believed it to be their own, but they were denied their rights and they were forced to flee from their homeland. Here the country referred is Germany, from where the Jews were forced to flee or escape. That place is still there in the atlas, but the refugee and his beloved cannot go there. In the village churchyard, there grows an old yew. Every spring it blossoms anew. Old passports can do that, my dear. Old passports can do that. In this stanza, the poet shows the contrast between nature and the refugees, as there is always a new hope for natural life, a new hope for new life in nature. Nature renews, unlike the refugees. This is a metaphor that captures new life, opportunity, and progression. This line indicates the helplessness of the refugees to go back to a safe place because they could not get their passports renewed. The consul banged to the table and said, "If you have got no passport, you are officially dead. But we are still alive, my dear, but we are still alive." The immigration official slammed down on the table in anger and said that if the refugee was not having a passport, then officially he was dead. But the refugee and his beloved were alive. Even people in authority refused to help, and the state didn't really care about the refugees. It also depicts that without passports or any valid records to prove their identity, they were simply nobody. Went to a committee, they offered me a chair, asked me politely to return next year, but where shall we go today, my dear, but where shall we go today? The refugee went to a committee, the committee which deals with the problems of the immigrants. They offered him a chair to sit and politely asked him to come next year, but they were unable to help him, and the refugee had no place where he could go. Came to a public meeting, the speaker got up and said, "If we let them in, they will steal our daily bread." He was talking of you and me, my dear. He was talking of you and me. The refugee went to a political rally of the native people against the refugees, where the speaker said that if the native people let the refugees enter their country, the refugees would consume all their resources and would make the native people suffer due to starvation. This stanza emphasizes that the people were unwilling to help the refugees and felt threatened by them. People were afraid of the couple and thought that they would steal their bread. The impersonal language "them" also captures the hostility of the native people towards the refugees. Thought I heard the thunder rumbling in the sky. It was Hitler over Europe saying they must die. We were in his mind, my dear, we were in his mind. This line indicates that the couple was in danger as they heard Hitler addressing his men, mentioning that the Jews didn't deserve to live, they should die. The sound of Hitler is compared to a frightening thunder that echoed the whole Europe. This threat of death hung over the whole Jews like the sword of Damocles. So a poodle in a jacket fastened with a pin, so a door opened and a cat let in. But they were in German Jews, my dear, but they were in German Jews. In this stanza, the poet highlights the contrast between the condition of the couple and the animals. The condition of Jews was worse than dogs and cats. The Jewish immigrants were not allowed to enter into places, homes and buildings where even the dogs and cats were permitted. Went down the harbor and stood upon the quay, saw the fish swimming as if they were free. Only 10 feet away, my dear, only 10 feet away. The refugee went down to the harbor and saw the fish swimming and enjoying their freedom in the sea. They were only 10 feet away from the refugee, but unlike the refugee, the fishes were free. Walked through a wood, saw the birds in the trees. They had no politicians and sang at their ease. They were in the human race, my dear, they were in the human race. While walking through the wood, the refugee noticed the birds singing freely in the trees because the politicians had not made their life hell. Their condition was better than human beings. Dreamed I saw a building with 1,000 floors, 1,000 windows, and 1,000 doors. Not one of them was ours, my dear, not one of them was ours. In his dream, he saw a building with 1,000 rooms, 1,000 floors, but there was not even a single room for the German Jews. A house of 1,000 floors, 1,000 windows and 1,000 doors refers to the city or the nation where they have sought refuge. This usage is an example for hyperbole or exaggeration. Stood on a great plain in the falling snow, 10,000 soldiers marched to and fro, looking for you and me, my dear, looking for you and me. This stanza not only gives an image of coldness and death, but also of survival in challenging situations. The soldiers were not looking for them particularly, but they were looking for all German Jews. As the speaker wants to highlight the tragedy and fear of the personal experience as well as the collective experience of all the German Jews. Here the writer uses hyperbole to show the immense number of soldiers searching for them or the Jewish refugees in general. He says there are 10,000 soldiers searching for him and his beloved. Now let's have a look into the different themes in the poem. The two major themes dealt with in the poem are anti-Semitism and exile and loneliness. Anti-Semitism means hostility or hatred or prejudice or discrimination against Jews. Refugee Blues is about the plight of Jewish refugees in the 1930s. When the poem was written in 1939, millions of Jews were trying to flee Nazi Germany. However, most countries had strict quotas on Jewish immigration. And as a result, most Jews were sent back. The speaker of Refugee Blues is one of these Jews and thus faces two kinds of anti-Semitism. On the one hand, there is the Nazi regime in Germany under Hitler, with its explicit state-sanctioned violence against Jews. On the other hand, there is the less explicit but no less virulent anti-Semitism of the countries who use immigration quotas to exclude Jews. These countries have the power to help, indeed to save the speaker's life, but they refuse to do so. The poem thus levels a stern accusation against the nations and the people who turn their faces against the miseries of Jewish people. The poem closes with the refugees standing on a great plain in the falling snow. They have no place to hide, and there are 10,000 soldiers hunting for them. The poem strongly suggests that the countries that turn the speaker away share a good deal of the blame and responsibility. They had the power to save the speaker, but they failed to do so. Here, one thing you have to remember is that this was the condition of the Jewish immigrants once. But in the present world, we know what is happening there in the Middle East. The same Jewish people who were once the most suppressed people are now the worst oppressors in the world. And they are mercilessly suppressing the poor Palestinians and are doing all kinds of inhuman activities there. Now, because of them, the Palestinians are forced to flee from Palestine, their own homeland, because of these Jewish people. The other theme in the poem is exile and loneliness. Refugee Blues is in part about the fear and desperation of being a refugee. The speaker is terrified of returning to Germany, but also is unable to find a safe haven elsewhere. As a result, the speaker is isolated and in limbo, trapped between countries without a clear sense of home. The speaker doesn't hold out hope that this situation will get better, and the poem uses the speaker's despair and frustration to convey the loneliness, pain, and a sense of stagnancy that accompany exile. Now, while talking about the tone of the poem is melancholic. It is depressing and devastating. The dire plight of the Jews is presented starkly, making the readers uncomfortable, which is the idea of the poem itself. Now, before concluding the session, let's have a small discussion on the poetic devices used in this poem. First of all, hyperbole. As I have already mentioned, there are some instances of hyperbole used in this poem, like 10,000 soldiers. It is a kind of exaggeration, and a building with 1,000 floors, 1,000 windows, 1,000 doors. That is also a kind of hyperbole or exaggeration. Now, while talking about the stanzas, there are 12 stanzas in the poem, each stanza having 3 lines each. While talking about the rhyme and rhythm, the rhyme scheme used in the poem is A-A-B. That means the last words of the first 2 lines of each stanza rhyme with each other. There are some imagery in the poem when the speaker speaks of the yew in the churchyard blossoming in each spring each year, and while talking about the 10,000 soldiers searching for the speaker and his beloved in the falling snow. And now the metaphor used in the poem. The thunder rumbling in the distance is a metaphor for the orders of Hitler, which read, "Kill all Jews." Another poetic device is repetition. The last line of each of the 12 stanzas has a part of it repeated in itself. For example, "Only 10 feet away, my dear, only 10 feet away." Here, 10 feet away is repeated twice. This repetition is effective in emphasizing the content of the individual stanza. Moreover, the repetition of the word "my dear" in the last line of all stanzas make the poem really touching, emotional, and powerful. So that's the end of this session. Thank you.